Hey everyone, I'm Mariana, and today I'm going to be wrapping up my reading year. Now, normally you would see me do a top 10 list of my favorite books that I read last year. However, this time around, I decided to do something a little bit different. So instead of giving you a regular ranked top 10, I've come up with 10 categories for books that stood out the most to me in 2018. Let's get into it. First up is favorite classic. As you guys know, I make it my goal to read at least one classic per month, and my favorite classic of 2018 was Solaris by Stanislav Lem. This very well-known science fiction novel completely blew me away. If I had to pick a favorite overall for 2018, this book would be it, and this is something I would love to reread probably sometime soon, and it is definitely going to be one of my all-time favorites. You have this mysterious alien in the form of an ocean that messes with your mind. This is such an interesting idea, and it also digs deep into what our memories and what hanging on to our past does to us as humans. It is such an excellent classic. I could not recommend this enough. Now, I'm holding up a Russian version of this, translated from Polish, which is what it's originally written in. I actually listened to an audiobook, which I would highly recommend. Very good translation and very good audiobook in general, but I am curious to reread this in Russian and see which I like better. My favorite nonfiction book that I read last year is definitely The Romanov Sisters by Helen Rappaport. This was a surprisingly emotional experience for me. I don't really say that very often about nonfiction because I generally find a lot of nonfiction to be pretty dry, but the writing style here is fantastic. It's so atmospheric, so personal, and it really made me even tear up at certain points. Now, I am very kind of biased when it comes to the story of this royal family because, as you can imagine, I have been exposed to this story from my childhood. So I kind of knew going into this that I was going to enjoy this book, but I didn't know that I was going to love it so much. Once again, as with everything I mentioned today, I would highly recommend this if you have interest in this royal family, and even though you know how this is going to end, trust me, it still is absolutely heartbreaking to read, particularly because the author takes such a personal and warm approach. You really feel like you're getting to know these people. Basically, if you want some nonfiction that is going to hit you emotionally, this book is your friend. Biggest surprise of the year easily goes to I'm Thinking of Ending Things by Ian Reid. This book wasn't even on my radar. I've never heard of this book. I didn't have the intentions of reading this book, and then I heard Rachel from The Shades of Orange mention it and how much she loves it, so I was like, you know what, I'll give it a try. And guys, what a psychological thriller. This is the kind of book you want to read in one sitting. You don't want to know anything about it. The only thing you really need is the basic premise, which is there's a woman going on a road trip with her boyfriend to meet his parents, and she's thinking of ending the relationship. That's all you need to know, and trust me, this is going to keep your attention really well. I am honestly pretty surprised about how low the ratings are on Goodreads for this book because it deserves a much higher number than 3.3, which I think is what it is right now, maybe 3.35, something like that. I think this is a much better book. You have to just trust me on this one. This is a psychological thriller that you don't want to miss out on. As for biggest disappointment of the year for me, that definitely goes to Neverworld Wake by Marisha Pessl. Not my least favorite book that I read last year. That would have to go to The Troop by Nick Cutter because that book was just way too gross for me. I don't like horror that grosses you out, and that's the main thing of why it's scary. I don't find it scary, I just find it gross. But Neverworld Wake was something I really looked forward to, particularly because I loved Night Film by Marisha Pessl. It's one of my favorite books, and this just really really disappointed me. I couldn't care less about the characters. I thought there was more that could have been done with the story because the premise is really interesting. There's this limbo situation involved. I'm not really going to go into the plot. If you like Marisha Pessel's writing, this is a very stripped down version of it, so that was kind of a bummer. And if you're someone like me who needs great characters in the story, this is not going to be your book. I don't think you're gonna like it. On a more positive note, my favorite audiobook of 2018 was easily Pet Sematary by Stephen King, narrated by Dexter himself, Michael C. Hall. This can actually count as a runner-up to Surprise of the Year because, once again, had no intentions of reading this because, I don't know, I just didn't think I had any interest in Pet Sematary, and then people kept telling me that no, I should really give it a try. It's a really great novel, and I'm so glad I did because now it is easily in my top 3 of all of the Stephen King that I've read, which isn't a ton, but still more than 3. I can't say that I found this particularly scary or terrifying. I've heard a lot of people say that this is one of the scariest books they've ever read. To me, this was more sad than scary. Let me know if you felt that way about this book because most people just think it's really, really scary, but I loved it. It's such a heartbreaking family drama, in my opinion. It does have some scary moments that are disturbing. I would say disturbing is the right word for it. It's more disturbing than scary. Anyways, loved Pet Sematary, particularly performed by Michael C. Hall. The best series that I read last year is definitely Wayward Pines by Blake Crouch. This is something that is very difficult to talk about without giving away spoilers. Even telling you what the genre of the series is kind of a spoiler in its own way, so I'm not gonna do it. The reason I'm choosing Wayward Pines as my favorite series of the year is, first of all, because it is such a fun, fast-paced, fascinating thriller, kind of a mystery for a large part of the first book. Not really that much of a mystery for the rest of the series, but there's still enough going on there to keep you guessing. But also, I can't remember when was the last time I read an entire trilogy in 1 month. I don't remember when was the last time that happened. That's how engaged and gripped I was by this story. I'm not going to say it's flawless, and actually one of my biggest issues with it was that the main character is pretty bland, but the story just really, really makes up for it. So if you're looking for a fast-paced, fun thriller with some mind-bending stuff, check Wayward Pines out. The most thought-provoking book I read last year was easily The Noise of Time by Julian Barnes. This was my first time reading any Julian Barnes. I know he's a pretty popular author, but I can tell you this is not the last because I am fascinated by what he has to say, by his writing style, by how he approaches what he writes. I absolutely loved this book, and for days and days after finishing it, I just had this in my mind. I kept going over it. I kept thinking about what he was trying to say here. I kept trying to look up quotes and kind of re-experience them. It was definitely a very unique book. This is kind of a historical fiction biography reimagining. It's a very strange book. It is about a real-life composer, Dmitri Shostakovich, and it is based on real life events, and it is based on his life, and all of the people in this book are real people, but it's kind of Julian Barnes's interpretation of the composer's life. And man, this one hits hard, and I absolutely loved it. Julian Barnes just had so much to say about life and about the nature of art and about how fleeting time is and about happiness and all of that. And just this book is really short, actually, so it's really impressive how much he managed to pack into this one. And Yeah, let me know if you have any Julian Barnes recommendations for me in the comments below, because he has a lot of books out there and I don't know where to go next. The most beautifully written book of last year for me was Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This, as you may know, because this has been making the rounds on BookTube for years now, is about the last woman who was executed in Iceland. And as you can imagine, this is a very heartbreaking experience, but there's a lot more to it than just historical fiction. It is written in a very poetic way. It's one of those books where the writing just kind of wraps around you and wraps you in this atmosphere. It's the kind of story that you want to be slow paced and you want to kind of think about it as you're reading it, because it is so beautiful and so atmospheric and so fascinating. Hannah Kent has a lot to say about death and about, as morbid as it sounds, how death is perceived by different people. And specifically in this historical setting, it's not something you hear about or read about a lot. So wonderful, wonderful book, and particularly wonderfully written. My favorite reread of the year is Night Film by Marisha Pessl. I have been making it my goal to reread more books, to give myself permission to reread a favorite instead of reading something new, as odd as that sounds. Personally, I think it is very important to revisit favorites, because how do you even know the novel is still a favorite if you've read it once and you never cared to read it again? Yes, there are so many other books to read, there are so many new books coming out every year, but I think it's important to reread books, and this is one of those that I've reread last year and loved it just as much as the first time. I do have a very old review of this on my channel. If you are brave enough, you are welcome to watch it. I have to warn you, I don't exactly sound the same anymore. At least I don't feel like I do. I watch my old videos and it's a little bit of a strange experience, but if you want to know my initial thoughts on this book, they're in that video. I will absolutely link it down below. But yeah, loved this the second time around, and I still don't understand why people have a problem with the ending here. Finally, my last category is Best of the Rest. These are 3 books that are absolutely some of my favorite reads from last year, but I couldn't really come up with separate categories for them, so here we go. First up, The Book Thief by Markus Zusak. I am probably the last person on BookTube to read this, but yeah, I loved this book. This is historical fiction set during World War II, and it is beautiful and heartbreaking, and it is narrated by death, which sounds pretty ominous, but it is just excellent. I'm not even going to talk about it anymore because so many people know about it already. It's a wonderful book. If I'm not the last person to read it, and you are, you should read it. It's worth it. Another favorite of last year, set during World War II, is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. I am realizing I have really been hitting up historical fiction last year, which makes me really happy because it's not a genre I read a ton from, but it is a genre I want to read more of. So this is set in France, and this tells the story of 2 very different sisters who approach survival and life in general in very different ways. This has a bit of a slow start, but it is so worth it, and it needs that kind of slower start to really ramp up to what happens later on. Also, as you can imagine, heartbreaking and very beautifully written. This is a book that is recommended a lot, and I am now joining the people who are recommending it because it is very well worth reading. And last, but certainly not least, Slate House by David Mitchell. I didn't think that I would even be reading any more David Mitchell because my experience with Cloud Atlas was a bit of a fiasco. I don't not finish books very often, but that one I quit on. But this is wonderful. I absolutely loved it. It's a very cool and very unique ghost story that spans 5 decades. Yes, this tiny book has 5 decades of ghost storytelling in it. and it comes to a very unusual conclusion, which really made me want to read the Bone Clocks, because as far as I understand, there are certain elements that are in this book and in Bone Clocks, and they're kind of related. But you don't have to read the Bone Clocks to enjoy this, by the way, which people say you do, but I was not confused at any point. Anyways, Slate House. Wonderfully written, really cool ghost story. Check it out. If you've had bad luck with David Mitchell in the past, I think you should give him another try, because Slate House really surprised me. And that's it. I hope you guys enjoyed this slightly different take on my favorites of last year, and my movie favorites of 2018 are going to be coming out next week. And I hope you enjoyed this, because my movie favorites are going to be in a very similar format, just slightly different categories. You'll see. Hope you're looking forward to that. Let me know what your favorite books that you've read in 2018 were. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up, share it, subscribe to my channel, and I hope you're having a wonderful day. I will see you very soon in my next video. Bye.